doing different validation studies. So particularly using choice experiments that was just mentioned. So I'll give you some examples of that. And I was basically just handed over this presentation this morning because Natalie Olsen, my boss, was supposed to have done it, but other things comes in the way. So I excuse that maybe sometimes I'll have to look what is on the slides. I've done some small modifications to those. I have seen the slides before. Anyways, why are we doing economic valuation methods? Because many of the activities that we engage in daily have an effect that is external to the market. That is, I drive my car, I buy petrol, it gives out emissions, and those emissions have a consequence on climate regulation and climate change scenarios. So, but that consequence falls on society as a whole. That extra cost of that emission that I'm emitting doesn't fall on me. So that's what makes it an externality. It doesn't have a price. And so whenever an activity impacts some global public good, then that's when you have these externalities. And an example of global public good is the landscape. And global public good is a good which is non-rival and non-excludable. When I look at the landscape, and you're next by me, and you're looking at the landscape, the fact that you're looking on it, it doesn't hinder me looking at the landscape. The landscape is something that is everybody can appreciate, and the fact that you're looking at it doesn't reduce my consumption of it, and the fact that I'm using it, so it's non-excludable and it's non-rival. And for this reason, the landscape, or what we do with the landscape, it is unpriced. There's no price as such that we can capture in the market. So that means that the marketplace, our market economies, it fails to provide ecosystem services, because many ecosystem services, such as climate regulation and nutrient recycling, are public goods. They will be underprovided in the formal market economy as we know them. So we want to find a way, though, to put some sort of price so that we can account for those externalities and ideally, for example, tax the good according to its real value or its actual cost to society. So just very basic example. Let's see, okay, petrol, the price of petrol is a bad example because it's there's the OPEC cartel that influences the price. But assume you have some sort of, let's just assume it was a free on market without any interferences. Then the price is determined by the intersection between quantity and demand. But supply and demand, sorry. But actually, if the producer had to take into account the cost to society of that good, furnishing that good, then it would cost more and supply curve would shift up. So the optimal quantity of emissions is lower than the emission level that we have today. Okay, another example is of when you have external effects, is looking, for example, at the market price of timber this is in China in 1998. The market price is of between 50 and 60 US dollars. But when you take into account all the external consequences related to timber harvesting, such as loss of plant nutrients, lost runoff, desertification, etc., then the external costs 178% of the actual market price. So that suggests that loggers or timber companies should be paying, or we as consumers should be paying a much higher price for timber, so that less timber would be supplied in the market, and that we would have the optimal quality or quantity of that. Okay, so what is important when we're doing cost-benefit analysis? We're not valuing giving an absolute value to any service or any forest. We're always valuing changes. So, and those changes should not be drastic, because we say in economics term, non-marginal. We want marginal changes, because when they get, if you really wipe away all the forests in one country from one way to the other, you're going to change all the prices in the economy. You're going to change so many parameters that your whole equilibrium everything changes, so you cannot grasp really what is the impact of it's no longer marginal changes. The system can collapse, and you have no way of knowing the actual real value. So you're always looking at, okay, we're increasing the size of this wetland, or we're reducing it, or you don't want to go beyond thresholds effect, basically. So we're always valuing something relative to something else. And ideally, when we value something, whether it be, for example, the fact that we are cutting away a piece of a forest, we want to look into the total economic value of that landscape change. And by total economic value, I mean within the total economic value of any landscape, you have what you call direct use values. It has an impact on what I can harvest or what is harvested, all these goods that are directly furnished by the ecosystem. It also has an impact on indirect use values. Those are, so somebody mentioned supporting services. Supporting services are those services that support these middle ones, regulating services, but also provision services that you got in the first one. So the first one, direct use values, typically provision services, regulating services. Okay, so supporting services is all that which supports that which we get out of it. Okay, and so getting back to the indirect use value, there's an indirect use from the forest in that it hinders soil erosion, and that it replenishes nutrients of the soil, or that it may have some medicinal plants that can be used in the future. That's an option value. We don't use it today, but it has a value just because there's something that we may otherwise miss out on. Also, similarly, there's another set of values that is called non-use existence values. An example is, I don't go to the tropical rainforest, but I draw use of it simply by knowing that it's there. It gives me utility, say that in economics. It gives me well-being to know that the ecosystem is healthy and that there's animals in it. On the non-use values, also have bequest values, the fact that I want to pass something on to other generations. Okay, so you can see when you're looking at the total economic value of a change, it's very comprehensive. Of course, we cannot value if we were to value, when you say you have a landscape change, a change in land use, if you want to value every single good and service that's impacted, you have set yourself for a long, cumbersome exercise. So that's when, going back to Pavan, you need to select those services and goods and services that are of prime importance, well, depending on your budget, obviously. So when we're doing cost benefits analysis, what we're saying is we're looking at, okay, what's the policy change? What's going to change? Okay, there's a proposition to plant or to have oil plant plantations. How does that impact the ecosystem? How does that impact ecosystem services? And then you translate that into human welfare, and human welfare is essentially the economic value for some people. In new classical economics, human welfare is simply captured in the economic value of changes in ecosystem services. So there's some criticism of this approach, obviously, because it's all based on our value system, not the fact that a bird may be important independently of whether we attribute a value to it or not. That's the criticism. On the other hand, if we don't attribute a value to that bird, that's the same as saying it's zero. And so it will continue to be neglected in policy making. So now a little bit of different types of valuation methods. You've got those that are consistent with what is called welfare economic theory, where you are looking at preferences, people's preferences. And preferences are revealed in people's, what they're willing to pay for a good. So in revealed preference methods, you will estimate what people are willing to pay for a certain land use change, derived from the choices made in a market complementary to the good or service that we're valuing. So for example, assuming that we're looking at the recreational value, which is a cultural ecosystem service of a forest, then a good method to use, so relative to no forest, for example, would be how much time are people spending to go to the forest? So how much petrol do they use? How much time? What's the opportunity cost of that time? So what could they spend? So then usually you look at the wage that people have, and they go, okay, they go, they spend 4 hours on a Saturday. So you're actually going on the field and doing a survey with the people that come to the forest, and you ask them how much time they spend on their wage, etc. And from that you can attribute a value to forest recreation. Then you also got the hedonic pricing method, which is where you're looking at the prices of houses nearby. It could also be hotels. Why are the hotels in this part of Jeju Island more expensive than those a little bit further away? Well, that's probably because there's some amenities in this area, but we cannot put a price on the beautiful cliffs and the beautiful landscape. But we can maybe, if we find a hotel that's exactly the equivalent as this one in another part of Jeju that doesn't have the same landscape amenities, then we can derive the value of the landscape amenities by using the hedonic pricing analysis. This method is largely used, just one example of, for example, pig farms. It smells a lot, and you can look at what is the negative, the nuisance value of that smell by looking at the prices of houses close by pig farms relative to houses that are exactly the same kind of neighborhood, etc., but don't have that smell. And these methods are usually, you do them once you have the pig farm. You can't apply them if the pig farm is not there. Okay, so there's some slides here if you want to look more into the details. It explains in more detail from what I just said. Okay, then, so you have one set of methods that are called revealed preference, then you have stated preference. Here you're actually constructing a market, a hypothetical market. In an example where, for example, you want to make a pig farm. No, whatever. You want to do something, you want to change something, but you don't know beforehand what is the actual social cost of doing that. Then you construct a hypothetical market. You may use contingent valuation methods or choice experiments. Contingent valuation methods has historically been used a lot. It's just more ancient than the choice experiment. Here you're looking at let's take an example. Okay, we'll look at the wetland. In contingent valuation methods, you would be asking people, what are you willing to pay to restore this, make sure that this wetland is restored, or assuming that the wetland is already there and there's projects to drain it, how much would you need in compensation to be willing to forego the existence of this wetland? So here you're looking at it's a good as a whole. In choice experiments, you assume that the wetland has attributes. The wetland is associated with recreation, with biodiversity, with regulating services, all sorts of things. So then that it's really unique in the sense that you can really estimate every single value of, and often there are trade-offs when you are wanting to restore a wetland because you can optimize it for different things. So in that sense, a choice experiment is very useful. It also you can obtain a lot of data from a small sample. And in a little while, we're going to try to do a choice experiment together, and I'm going to see whether we will get statistically significant results just from you people in this room. There are these what's called efficient experimental designs now that are made, which permits you to just simply reveal a lot of information from each individual because you're usually given many choice sets. Okay, and so the merits are that you can use it both both for non-use values, such as I derive value from the fact that there's this bird or there's this biodiversity, non-use values and use values that I can go for a walk, or that I can go fishing. And it can be used both before the policy change and after the policy change. Here's an example of actually a project I just did. Oh, I'm so sorry.
I think it's just censored because of the beach.
Okay, basically, I recently conducted. Yeah, but I wanna, yeah. Maybe during the coffee break, we can just put over my PowerPoints on your computer.
That's correct, yeah.
Well, this one is 2 minutes, or 1 minute. What happened here? Oh, my goodness. So don't look at the screen, basically. Oh. But anyways, I just